or what made you do this book and be persistent for so many years? Probably when you first started or the idea evolved, ki, I need to do a book, because many times we have those ideas. We pursue most of times before it starts also it fizzles out. How could you at such a early age come to कि मुझे यही करना है, ऐसी बुक करना है?
Okay. One of the things is, I don't get bored very easily. Okay, I can do things for enormously long periods of time. Okay, so I can just stick with an idea. In fact, people find it amusing that how. So I'm not surprised by the question that you have asked. I mean, it's something that I get asked very often. But the thing is, if you think that, and I think I do, it happens with me very often that at the start of an idea or a project, I tell myself very clearly that, look, boss, you don't know enough about it. Okay? Which then means that any going forward is sort of value addition. You know what I mean? It's sort of progress. And you're also, because like I said, I had no idea what rural Bengal was. Okay, so when I started, I had no idea that it would be a book. That idea happened about three years later. When I first started shooting, the scope of my imagination was कि मुझे magazine में 8 पेज मांगना है. That's what I told myself. So when I'm sort of trying to construct this thing, I'm saying, I think I've got my 8 picture, because you're saying everything that you have shot is good. Which is part of the stupidity of photographers, where we all think, जो भी मैंने किया है अच्छा ही. So you're saying 8 पेज तो मिल ही जाए, but obviously वो नहीं होगा. But you also, and like I'm saying, 5 days of work, actual shooting, 360 days of thinking, reading, learning, chatting with friends, debating, doing all kinds of things. And as that is moving, you are realizing that, oh my God, I know nothing. There's so much more to do. And wo karte karte, it took 13 years for the point where you say, okay, I think now it's done. And I think you know that, because if that process is correct, because you have to trust that process, right? I'm saying it's a little different from, like say, I've been, for instance, photographing public clocks in Bombay for the last 50 years, okay? The reason it hasn't stopped, one is I'm not bored, but the other is that I don't know if there are 2 more left, which is different from, say, doing this project. Because here I'm not trying to say कि I'm documenting rural Bengal, where कल मिट्टी के घर होते थे, आज concrete का घर. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to tell a very specific story, which is the story of my family and how it celebrates Durga Puja. So it started with me shooting just the Durga Puja, which I thought could suffice for 8 pages in a magazine. Then you realize that, but you can't just photograph the Durga Puja, you have to photograph the family. Because without the family, there is no Durga Puja. Right? So वो करते करते थोड़ा और बढ़ गया चीज, and then you realize that, but I also need to include the village, because this whole idea of the silence of rural Bengal, blah blah blah, all that, you realize that without that context, the Durga Puja you can't tell that story. You understand what I'm saying? So slowly the scope of the idea is growing, and you could not have known it when you started, because you were ignorant. I mean, I was plain ignorant about the milieu that I was shooting. I had no idea. So I could not have known what would be, let's say, even a simple, that one picture towards the end where you see it's like, it's a sort of a village street with, Pattiga shadow and one little boat in the distance. How do you decide whether that is the picture that you should shoot or you should not shoot? Either you say, hey, मुझे अच्छा लगा तो मैंने shoot. वो हो सकता है, we are all photographers, we shoot a lot of things purposeless, we shoot, we like it, so we shoot it, which is valid. But I'm saying for a project like this, to say, why is this needed? That idea of the relevant shot that I was saying. Till you don't, as your knowledge of the milieu grows, your idea of what is relevant, necessary, all that is kind of building. And now you are slowly populating the details of the story. Otherwise, you are only making, so if you look at the very first 2 years what I shot, nothing from that actually survives in the book, except that picture of the Kolabocha. Because that is so easy, meaning anybody, like I see even my cousins, my uncles, everybody does that picture and they all seem to do it reasonably well because it is just so pretty a thing to shoot. It doesn't require much, you know what I mean. That's the only picture which has survived from the first 2 or 3 years work. Because you realize that you were painting with broad strokes, you were missing details. This whole work is actually about the detail. It's not about painting with broad strokes. So that's the thing. So that's why it took time. That's how one arrived here. Yeah, does it answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just leave the break because we'll change the
I
setup.
have a couple of
Yeah, please.
The Excel sheet, is that something that you normally do for all your projects?
For a lot of them, or there could be like variants of the Excel sheet. For instance, say some of the other stuff that I'm doing now, it doesn't have Excel sheets of this detail. One other change that had happened, and I'll tell you, we were shooting on film, which meant that you were constantly making little prints and spreading them out and doing all that, wallpaper, divar and all that. Now because I'm not printing that often because it's so much expensive and all, the technique, so it's a workflow that has changed. So what I do is I work very much with a PowerPoint. So every day that I'm shooting, okay, there is a master PowerPoint on which I'm adding stuff. That is a broad sequence sort of thing. So I get a sense of where it's going, and then if needed, then I will go into greater detail. But so I don't do the Excel sheet the way I did it there. And I think that idea of the Excel sheet was really prompted by the fact that these were prints which are just lying here and I have to kind of remove it every 1 week or whatever, so the floor gets clean. So which is why the Excel sheet was there, so it was always in front of me. And I carried a printout often, so I could look at it on the train or on flights to make changes.
How much of this was pre-visualized? You actually went to the village and then you...
It actually wasn't. The thing is, there was the pre-visualizing, so that's what I'm saying. The Excel sheet actually started happening from, say, year 3 or year 4. Okay? So, what that first Excel sheet, what it had, was accumulated wisdom from the first 3 years. Right? And then over, I think, the next 1 year or so, 2 years max, is when it kept getting fine-tuned. So the pre-visualization is those first 3 years of 3 years. And then you're kind of, like I'm saying, because I would always have a printout of the Excel sheet. So even during those 5 days, because one didn't have laptops and all that, So you would come back and then, or sit down there and quickly make a notification on the Excel sheet, new idea, it can go in here or whatever. So that was happening all the time, but I think by about year 6 is when the Excel sheet was almost kind of made. Very little chota mota, like that picture of that lady with the broom. Those were things which weren't on the Excel sheet. And it's usually very much like a kaleidoscope, right? One thing gets added and then suddenly everything else then you have to relook at. So you can't not relook at those. You can't say कि हाँ चलो, वो train का sequence निकल गया, एक गाड़ी आ गया. That's it. It doesn't. You still have to look at. Is every little bit fitting and things. So.
Okay. So that was really engaging, but that also reminds us. So we had, I think, you have seen the calendar for the show. So we prepared a script before we went for the shoot for almost, I think, pretty big. The only concern of the script that we need to prepare, because we had to be very quick on the roads of Mumbai, because we didn't have permissions from all the authorities. So we had to be like within 2 minutes we have to get down, complete the shoot, get up on the bus. So that's the reason why we had a very detailed script, and that script was so detailed made that from where it's almost like a storyboarding, like which will be the angle.
So that's the Excel sheet is like a storyboard.
And trust me, we had a lot of discussions. So there's my another friend who is a co-founder of VIBGYOR, sort of sitting in Calcutta. So we were having discussions. So then we were visual, and he works for movies. So he has a different perspective in scene photography. So I was taking influence and suggestions from him. We were discussing, because he was also there and all. Since it was a calendar, so we could discuss with a lot of other mentors. But when this kind of write-up is always there, it makes a lot of difference to your project. And I think that was one key